And it was really an honor and pleasure to be here. It's also an honor to speak after John, and that was an excellent talk. And I think John is one of the best colleagues and researchers in this area, and it's it's going to be okay. We're good. I think a challenge to keep your attention after his talk, but hopefully what I'm going to do is going to build on what Dr. Violante spoke to you already about, and focus mainly. I don't want to keep hammering. I'll start a little bit about some of the things that he spoke on, and just to add, because he gave you some teases. But I want to focus mainly about what you can do positively, because it's not all about, everything's bad and everything's going to go wrong, so I'm already screwed. So, why don't I just go out and buy some cigarettes and have a donut and some bacon and not sleep and then get drunk, right? So, John really covered, in the first hour, police work and health. But let me just come back to a few things he said and maybe add a couple more, and then get on to what was the prevention aspects around diet. So you mentioned the thing that we said about, it's 98% routine and 2% sheer terror. Well, even here, okay, the guy on the ground, if he's with us still, he's under some stress right now, but the officers, how did he get on the ground, and what happened before that? If you measured any one of these officers' heart rates, they're surely at maximum or super maximum. So, and their adrenaline is surging. And the question is, this stuff is going to come up day to day, but the question is, how can you be better prepared to survive it, right? If you're a healthy person, it's just like a sport event. A little adrenaline is good for us now and again. If you're a person with an enlarged heart and blockages in your coronary arteries, a little adrenaline surge might be, your last surge, right? So, and John went over a lot of these things. So it's physical exertion, but it's irregular. We don't necessarily get the exercise that we need, but then you might be called on, to pursue someone or restrain someone, extremely stressful. John covered about shift work and interactive effects on how that adversely affects diet. Of course, there's noise exposure, post-traumatic stress. John has spoken eloquently about that, and the decision demand control. So in other words, what that means, that's a model developed by this gentleman named Karasik. It's basically a CEO of a company, let's say a Fortune 500 company. They have a huge amount of responsibility, but they also have almost absolute control over the company. A police officer who's dispatched, you got a lot of responsibility, but you have to go where they're telling you to go. You really don't have control. So that's what they're talking about. High demands, low control. And of course, when you have these stressful duties, it's stressful on the whole body. Just about every system in the body is going to be affected, but in particular the cardiovascular system. Okay, so this is an interesting case study that was done. They just took a single officer who was on duty during his routine patrol in a vehicle, and they hooked him up to a heart rate monitor. Young person in their 30s, healthy. First thing you see here is that the average heart rate is going about 100. So you all know that's much higher than normal. A resting heart rate should be somewhere like 60 to 70. So just putting on, as Aaron was saying last night, just putting on the uniform, getting into the car, there's already some stress going on. And then you see what happens there's at 21:45 hours, he has a pursuit of a DUI. The vehicle is finally cornered. Looks like the guy's going to get out. Doesn't know if he's going to be a confrontation. Heart rate goes over 160. And then apparently the guy was so drunk he just fell over. So now the heart rate goes back down. But so again, like if that was a person who was not fit, that could be something that could provoke a heart attack or even sudden cardiac death right there. And as John said, there's increased prevalence of obesity. There's a high prevalence of metabolic syndrome, which is a precursor of diabetes and heart disease. And indeed, number of different population studies of law enforcement officers show anywhere from a 5 to 50% increase in cardiovascular morbidity as compared to the general population, which is counter to what we expect because police officers have to go through medical and other types of selection. So at the beginning, police officers should be healthier than the general population, which is what we call healthy worker effect. So despite that initial selection of a healthy worker effect, they're at a higher risk of heart disease because of their job and what they do. And John and the chief mentioned about, the problem of sudden cardiac deaths. Yes, homicides and accidents are the #1 cause of fatality on the job for law enforcement officers, but sudden cardiac death or heart attacks is about 10%. And we did do a study, and we looked at specific types of duties. And without giving you all the, boring you with how we did it, the bottom line is that compared to routine duties, which is about 75% of what law enforcement officers do, certain emergency duties, if you will, convey an increased risk of sudden cardiac death. But that risk is huge. So for example, just the stress of transporting or supervising prisoners, not having a confrontation with a prisoner, but just being with those prisoners, transporting them, supervising them in an area, that conveys anywhere from a 3 to 7-fold risk of sudden cardiac death. Medical and rescue operations, 6 to 8-fold risk. Physical training, 20 to 23-fold risk. And then if you look at pursuits, restraints, and physical altercations, it's like 30 to 70-fold, which is astronomical. The only thing that's really similar to this is among firefighters fighting a fire with full turnout gear compared to sitting around in the station. So the risk is significant. But again, the question comes back to who are the people at risk for this and how do you protect yourself? So a while ago, they did an informal study, the Justice Academy in North Carolina, and they interviewed police officers who had survived a heart attack. And then I compared them on the right side of the slide to some studies of police officers that are just cross-sectional. So they look at all police officers, not specifically ones who had heart disease. And you see that all of the classic risk factors are elevated in the group on the left. The only one that's actually lower is overweight, but that's falsely low because they asked the heart attack survivors, they didn't ask them their height and their weight. They said, are you overweight? And of course, people always don't consider themselves. We did I'm not sure about, I'm sure it's similar in police officers. We did a study in firefighters. They would not say they were obese until they were actually morbidly obese. So, but anyway. And John mentioned that, shift work is associated with poor eating. It's associated with obesity and diabetes. It's also associated with cancer. But did you know that also obesity is a cancer risk? So just like the IARC, which is this international agency for research on cancer, they study all different chemicals and risk factors and things, and shift work was one of the things that they've studied, and they say it's a probable carcinogen. They've studied obesity, and it's a definite carcinogen, and some of these things, it's 3-fold, 4-fold risk for certain cancers, such as, say, cancer of the esophagus. So it's a problem, but what do we do about it? So John alluded to a lot of things you can do, which is regular exercise, good sleep, healthy diet, etc. Moderate your amount of alcohol. But I want to focus with you this morning on diet, and in particular, a pattern of eating called the Mediterranean diet, which over the last 70 years has been studied extensively, both in the US and in Europe and in other countries. And it really is the healthiest pattern of eating you can do. It's not just a diet that, everyone has problems with diets because you do it for a week, 2 weeks, for a month, maybe even 6 months, and then what happens? You fail. I mean, at some point, it's a regimen. You can't keep up with it anymore. This is more of a lifestyle. You don't need to count calories. You just focused on trying to make better choices when you can, and eating a higher quality or better quality of food. So let me explain a little bit. look at this. This is a study that was done by some colleagues at Harvard, and they looked at different types of food and drink, and if you, in large populations that they were following over a number of years, and simply they said, if we compare people, and they asked them every year by questionnaire what they were eating, and they said, okay, if you know, over the last 5 years you were eating more potato chips and drinking more Coca-Cola and more red meat and butter, et cetera, well, they found people tended to gain weight. If people were eating more vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, and yogurt, they tended to lose weight. So I mean, it's really not that hard. It's not rocket science. It's kind of the stuff that you already know. It's just about thinking about it before you sit down and choose. Which, let me ask the question this, which breakfast, A or B, is more likely to be a police officer's breakfast? Or if we had a police officer, if we had served breakfast this morning, which one would have been more likely to be out on the counter? A, right. But which one's more healthy? B. Which one would you rather eat? Be honest. A lot of people, maybe there are people who would want to eat A, but there would be a lot of people who would eat B. Which lunch is better, this one or this one? So grilled chicken, corn, peppers, cold cuts, and mayonnaise. So A is better for you, but again, B. This was actually a firefighter. One of my former students is a medical director at I won't say what department, but he took the picture and sent it to me. A text message said, "Look at what they're," and it was a cancer meeting. You know, now IARC has also studied processed meats, right? And if you eat processed meat every day, I mean, of course, everybody loves a good sausage sandwich or salami. I mean, I'm not saying don't eat it. I'd be the first one to say I do eat it, but if you eat that every day, that's a 20% increase in your risk of colon cancer. So they're having a meeting on cancer, and they're serving, you know, a carcinogenic lunch. So today at lunch, Dr. Moffitt's team is going to serve you a healthy lunch that's based on Mediterranean diet, and you know, I think you'll like it. But I think it's important because you can't just hear about these things. You have to actually try it and do it. And I'll try to, you know, let me give you some more background, but also give you some tips about how to do this in a way that doesn't seem so hard. So the idea behind this is this has really been around for thousands of years, and the good thing about that is, you know, if you think about something like olive oil, this has been around, you know, way before Jesus Christ, you know, a couple millennia before that, to the ancient times, and it's, you know, it's absolutely safe. It's not like some newfangled diet that just came out, you know, ketogenic, I don't know what, and try it, and paleo this, you know. This has been around, it's proven, it's safe. But this grew up around the Mediterranean where olive trees are grown, so hence they were able to produce olive oil. And it was really kind of the diet of convenience, what poor people were eating in Spain, Italy, and Greece in the 50s and 60s, because they didn't have a lot of money. They couldn't go out and buy meat every day. Maybe they had animals, but they had, you know, they could only kill a couple animals a year. You had to have the animals around for making milk and cheese and other things. So, so they ate everything, but they ate, you know, red meat, sweets, things like that in moderation. They drank wine with their meals, and they ate more fish and vegetables and plant food, and they got 30 or 40% of their calories from olive oil. 30 or 40%. So it's not fat. Fat is not bad, it's the type of fat. And it's really sugar, you know, so sugar and saturated fats. So what are some of the health benefits of this? Well, let's compare it to some other diets. So this was a study that was done, it's very interesting, it was a nuclear power plant in Israel. So they can control, there's a lot of security there in Israel in general, but especially in an atomic power plant. And they control absolutely every single thing that goes in and out of that plant. And they took people who were employed at the plant and they were obese, and they randomized them into one of three groups. So one group got a low-fat diet, which is what American Heart Association used to recommend. Another group got a it was basically an Atkins diet, which says low carb there. And the third group got a Mediterranean diet. And then you see the study went for 24 months, but then they followed them up to 6 years. So at the end of 2 years, you can see in the panel up here that says weight, the low-fat group actually did the worst in terms of weight loss, although all three groups lost weight. But you see at 6 years, only the Mediterranean and the low carb were still significantly reduced from baseline, because it's very hard to follow an Atkins or a low-fat diet for a long period of time, right? And if you look at some of the other markers, I mean, the bottom line is in 3 or 4 cases, the Mediterranean diet at 6 years was much better. And you can see that some of these things, like for example, here is total cholesterol. At 6 years, it was even lower than it was at 2 years, okay? So this is something that it is actually sustainable. And the same study was interesting. They also did an intervention with the spouses, so the wives of these gentlemen that worked in the plant, and they had significant changes as well. So it's something you could do as a family, as adopted. Another interesting trial was the Lyon heart study. What they did, this was in France some years ago, and they took people who had already suffered a heart attack, and they said, okay, we're going to randomize you either to just keep doing what you're doing, or you're going to go into this experimental group where you'll eat a Mediterranean-style diet. And you know, the French love butter, so they gave them actually a margarine that was based on plant oils and was chemically very similar to olive oil. And they ate more fish and vegetables and things. And what you see here, this is what we call a survival curve. So what you see is that more people in the control group are having second heart attacks or dying of heart disease, whereas more than 90%, only about 5% of the experimental group went on up to even at 5 years to have another heart attack. So this study was actually stopped early because the difference was so great. They said it's not ethical to continue this study anymore. We have to let the people who are in the control group know this is the right thing to do. John mentioned metabolic syndrome. So this is a study from Italy that took people with metabolic syndrome and they said, just keep eating what you're eating or go on a Mediterranean diet. You see the people in the Mediterranean diet, more than half of them by the end of 2 years had resolved their metabolic syndrome. That's, I used to practice general internal medicine. The success rate for resolving metabolic syndrome and diabetes was, about 1%. And you can see, in a controlled diet, 10% reduced it. And you see that in studies just because people start doing things just because they're in a study. But the difference was huge. There was a study in Spain, it's still going on now, but it's in a different phase now it was called PrediMed, now it's called PrediMed Plus because they're added features. But the bottom line is unlike the Lyon study, they took people who had never had a heart attack before, but they were middle-aged or older and they were at high risk. So they had metabolic syndrome, some of them had diabetes, some of them were smokers, hypertension, et cetera. They had a lot of risk factors. And they randomized them either to what was an American Heart Association type low-fat diet or a Mediterranean diet that was supplemented with either olive oil or with nuts. And again, the study was stopped early. This is sort of the opposite type of curve here. So this now is not a survival curve. This is the cumulative incidence. So it's like every time someone in each of the groups gets a heart disease event, you get a check on the box. And so you can see that the control group is having heart events much faster. The intervention groups, the Mediterranean diet groups, is much slower. So there's a big difference. It's about a 30% decrease. Do you know how much of a decrease do you get in heart disease from taking a statin? It's about 20 and 25%. So the difference here is actually greater than taking a statin. And I'm not saying if you're prescribed a statin, you probably should take it. unless you discuss it with your doctor and you get a second opinion. They say don't. But what I'm saying is that's how powerful this is. And it also has beneficial effects on a lot of other things, as we'll see. So heart disease is reduced by somewhere between 30, 40%. Diabetes is reduced 25 to 30%. Body weight, abdominal circumference, body mass index, metabolic syndrome, about 30, 40%. We even did a study with Midwestern firefighters from Ohio, Missouri, and Kansas a couple years back, and we compared people who were in the top 25%. Their diets most resembled a Mediterranean diet. We compared them with the people who were in the bottom 25%, whose diets most resembled an American diet. There was a 40%, again, there was a 40% difference in the prevalence of metabolic syndrome, and there were 40% difference in the risk of weight gain, all those things. But look, it's also a 30%, 20 to 30% decrease in the risk of cancer, and up to 25% decreased risk of death from any cause. So that's pretty good. If that didn't get your attention, it can also decrease your risk of Alzheimer's or cognitive dysfunction. And if that still didn't get your attention, people who take this diet have better sex. At least they say they do. Okay? Improve, and that goes for men and for women. And it's funny, but it's true. And better sleep, and lower incidence of depression. So just about everything we've looked at is better with this diet. And these are some of the numbers just for specific types of cancer. But you can see pretty much across the board there are changes. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about what we're doing here in Indianapolis with the fire department, and how this might be applicable, I think, to you all and your colleagues. So the fire department here is organized into 44 stations, and what we did is John mentioned the team approach. It's easier to do these things together as opposed to by yourself. So we figured we should randomize people at the level of the fire station, not the individual. So 22 fire stations were randomized into a control group, 22 into an intervention group. But then at the end of 1 year, which will come up in December of this year, the intervention group will continue on their own with less active involvement from us, and the control group will get a chance to be involved, and they'll have 6 months of very active intervention from us. But the key feature of the intervention is actually a website to which all the firefighters of the intervention have access to, and one of the key concepts is a pyramid. So the pyramid represents conceptually sort of the recommendation. So you're eating, the wider the pyramid is, the more you're doing it. The narrower it is, or the farther up you go on the top, the less you're doing it. But it's not, again, you're not eliminating all things. So red meat and sweet are small at the top. We have dairy, lean proteins, including beans, fish, seafood, poultry, eggs, white meats like chicken, rabbit, turkey, and then plant-based foods. And olive oil is really, really central. So olive oil is encouraged to be used for all cooking, salad dressings, adding flavor to foods at the table, marinating foods before you cook them, etc. Again, you can't be afraid of this, and people, in the classic examples, they were getting 30 to 40% of their calories from this. One of the best things you could do is like, take a shot of that in the morning, just like a vitamin. And then the next key thing is, so if we can ask simple things, if you could put away the butter, buy some olive oil, maybe try that this weekend. And the next thing is, again, I'm not saying don't eat red meat. I'm the first one to say, I'll get home tonight and my kids will probably say, Baba, can you go grill a steak? I say, yeah, but if you eat it once or twice a week, it's going to taste better than if you eat it every day. But maybe 3 out of 4 times reach for chicken or turkey or something else. Have more beans, get a lot of protein there, and have more, try to have a salad or a vegetable with every meal. Not just, a black and white plate, a roast beef and mashed potatoes. Not much. The more color on the plate, the better. Another huge thing is just putting away soft drinks and energy drinks and substituting water. Sugar sweetened beverages, single biggest source of empty, useless calories. It's probably 5-6 pounds a year right there if you drink a soda a day. It's huge. It's huge. And we need, just think about it. Every animal. How many animals drink Coca-Cola? Right? So we were built to drink water. And you need emergency responders tend to be dehydrated. Maybe we had a few drinks last night, stay up, then you drink some coffee in the morning, pee from that. So the more water you drink in general, the better. And then again, it is a lifestyle. It's not just a diet, and you have to combine that with other things. So as John talked about, adequate sleep, frequent physical activity, and spending time with your friends and your family. That's important. That's something that people in Mediterranean countries do a lot, because it gives when you eat with other people, that gives you a chance to decompress, to talk to other people, to bounce your ideas off someone else, your concerns. When you sit by yourself, what do you tend to do? You tend to internalize all your thoughts and your mind races and all that stuff. Now then, some of the other things we have on the website, we have some videos that some of you may know. Heather Fink is a dietitian here in the area who's excellent, who does a lot of work with Dr. Moffat and police and fire. And we had her do a bunch of videos, but they're all short. They're about 4 to 8 minutes, so I can even pay attention for that long. And then at the end, there are key points. So like, for example, I think this is the very first video, the take-home points are, you don't have to give up any food. You can still eat everything. You don't have to count calories, etc. But just try to choose healthier options and think twice about what you select. Okay. We talked about healthy food. John talked about this, and obviously, we could just tell you, eat less fast food or don't eat fast food, but that's not very realistic, is it? I mean, sometimes you're on the go, and it's better, I would say it's better to eat than not eat, because if you just starve yourself, you're not going to function very well. And then when you finally do get the chance to eat, you're going to eat the wrong way because you're over hungry. But there are ways, let's say, to get food on the run that's healthier. So what about, instead of a Big Mac and French fries and a Coke, what if you went to Qdoba or something, I'm not endorsing that, but some place like that, and you got a burrito bowl with brown rice, chicken, and beans, and some salsa, some whatever, vegetables you like in there, and you have some water. I mean, that's a much, the calorie count might even not be that different, but the quality, put some, maybe some guacamole in there. Avocado is another healthy fat. It's very similar to olive oil. Avocado is very healthy, and it's filling. It's filling. And that's the thing, when you eat these healthy fats, it's filling. When you eat sweets, you tend to have a crash, and then the same thing with white bread. So, you can eat that kind of thing fast, but it's a much higher quality, better for you. We did focus groups with the firefighters and their wives, and we came up with favorite recipes, and so there were a lot of like chicken and ground beef recipes and things like that. And we teamed up with our nutritionists and some celebrity chefs, and we have all these recipes, but this is just an example of one. Chef Maria is a friend of mine. She has a restaurant in Manhattan that people pay a lot of money to go to. Kelly Live? What's the gentleman's name? What's her co-host now? Not Regis anymore. It's a Ryan now. Yeah, Ryan raves about her restaurant. But anyway, so this is a meatloaf that's made with ground turkey and ground chicken. And most people wouldn't even really notice the difference. It's delicious. Shopping lists. And then the firefighters are also getting coupons from Kroger, which is obviously a big grocer here in the area. But the coupons aren't good for potato chips or Coca-Cola, things like that. They're for things like, for example, here, things in the produce department, seafood department, olive oil, etc. I mentioned about the meeting, so this is the typical public safety meeting, the breakfast and the lunch. These are some of the meetings that we've run, and we have a guide up on the website that we've made available to the whole fire service, and we plan to adapt this to law enforcement. But it's basically, and Steve's group is putting this into effect, in the meetings that they've run so far this year, and it's gone really well. Even people who were skeptical, and you tell me after. Tell me, be honest. If you don't like the lunch, tell me. But I would be willing to bet that, the votes in favor will be very, very far ahead of those against it. What's happening with the study? So we're measuring something we call a modified Mediterranean diet score. It's basically, we ask people a lot of questions about what they've been eating, how frequently, how often, and what types of fats. Is it olive oil? What types of drinks? Is it water, Coke, etc.? And it's very early in the study, but we have some data that the group here has collected. And at 6 months so far, what it looks like is the people in the intervention group, compared to their baseline score, their scores are now about 10% better, and that difference is significant compared to the baseline score. But when we compare the delta or the change, so if we look at the baseline to 6 months for the control group, which also has a small bump, because again, every time people are in a study, they tend to maybe think about it, and they read the question, so they might say, well, yeah, I should eat olive oil or something like that. But there's a significant difference compared to the control group as well. We have a number of videos that are also testimonials on the website. So they're actually firefighters talking to firefighters, and we plan to do the same thing with law enforcement when we roll this out with law enforcement. But this is one example. A friend of mine here, Chief Willis, is a fire chief down in Alabama, and the eating down there is even, I would say it's more greasy than Indiana. As the chief says himself, a lot of deep frying. Not many. He said as far as vegetables were concerned, those are just things he was trying to get with his weed whacker before. But anyway, he came to a conference we ran in Boston 3 years ago. The time he came, he was 47 years old, had a lot of responsibilities as a fire chief, and he was under a lot of stress. And everything was going the wrong way for him, and his doctor was yelling at him, Chief, you gained a lot of weight, your blood pressure's going up, your cholesterol's going up, your blood sugar's going up, and I'm going to start you on 3 new medicines. And he kind of, that was pretty scary. And he got a scholarship to come to the conference. And again, it wasn't just talking about it. He actually walked the walk and talked the talk. We served the breakfast, the lunch, he was eating the food. And long story short, he and his wife started making small changes in their diet. And after 6 weeks, he lost 13 pounds, his blood pressure normalized, and his hemoglobin A1C went down by over a full point, which is actually, probably like a 20-30% decrease in the average blood glucose over the last 6 weeks. So it's pretty good. And he's not a let's just say he's not an underwear model. He's still a big gentleman, but he's sticking with it, and he's feeling better, and his wife. So it's not all about being in a calendar. It's about feeling better and living better. So the action item for us is really to try to bring this now over to law enforcement. And so we're working with our artist. We're adapting the logo here to Feeding America's Finest as opposed to the Bravest, and we have different versions of this. Maybe I can get your opinions on it later, which is best, with a police hat or a badge, etc. We have an application pending with the Broward Sheriff's Office to the Department of Justice, and waiting to hear what's going to happen with that. But I think we're going to, even if it's not funded, we're going to try something with Broward Sheriff's Office. And the artist is working on, some adaptations of the pyramid. But I'm gonna leave it there. I encourage you to, look into it, try it, see what you think of the lunch today. I think we have a break, which you need now. And then we'll be back to answer some questions together with Dr. Violante. So thank you very much for your attention.